quite obviously, if you're going to try and put a man on the moon, it's going to cost a lot of money. And this is money that America just didn't have at the time. They were putting everything into their defence budget against Russia. They could not afford to waste money on a dangerous and potentially embarrassing project where they are basically sending their men up on an explosive towards a big lump of rock in the sky. That can all end terribly badly for America.
One of the main motives for them actually achieving the lunar landings was the USSR. At the time, the USSR, or Soviet Union as otherwise known, had achieved so much, including the first man-made object to orbit the Earth, the first man and woman in space, the first animal in space, the first objects to both hard and soft land on the moon. That hard landing is where they just crash the thing into the moon, and the soft land is where they actually land it so it remains intact. Obviously the technology was there because the Russians had it, and it just took America to put a man in a, well, 3 men to be precise, in a pod and send them to the moon.
And that is a very good point. Russia did have the technology, not America. And that is a point that I will touch on later. So, the first reason that it was a hoax, basically, as most people in this room have probably seen, the waving flag on the moon. But we all know that the moon does not have an atmosphere. So as you can see in the photo, as they lift the flag up, it waves. Also, one thing that isn't generally commented on, when you lift the flag up, it's going to move up and then back down because there's a lot lower gravity on the moon, which is never seen in any of the photos or videos of this happening. The flag just goes up and then waves around as it would on Earth.
Okay, so this very simple point has a very simple explanation. The flag was starched so that it would remain upright on the moon. Obviously, you go to the moon, you spend millions and billions of dollars going to the moon. You don't want to plant your national flag there and just have it droop down so it looks like a piece of cloth on a stick. You want everyone to see this is America that has landed on the moon. So they starched it. And the way they starched it, when it was folded in its case in the landing pod, meant that when they unfurled it, the creases sort of kept, and it appeared to move like it was waving in a breeze, whereas in fact it was just counteracting, forces of them planting the flag, moved it, and it would move backwards because it was starched. It's starch and simply the laws of physics.
Now, moving on from the laws of physics, as you can see in a lot of the photos, there are no stars on the moon. And you've got no light pollution, you're not in the middle of a city, you don't have atmosphere in the way you have clouds, you have no reason not to be able to see the stars. Which, clearly here, where are they? They're not just going to disappear because America tells them to, as much as Americans may wish it.
One major thing you said there was there is no light pollution. Of course there is a light pollution, it's called Earth. America landed on the light side of the moon, so it's always facing Earth. There is a giant blue glowing orb in the sky that will obscure lots of light. Also, all photos taken on the landings were taken during lunar daytime, so it was also facing the sun, an even bigger source of light pollution. Here we can see a photo that was taken during the Apollo 16 landings with a UV camera. Clearly you can see in the centre that white smudge is Earth, and around it are dots which are stars. There were stars in the sky, they just weren't visible because of light from the Earth and the Sun.
Of course, those were photos from NASA.
Yes.
That came out later, after everybody had pointed out their mistakes. So another photographic mistake that NASA made was the crosshairs in the photographs. And in many photographs, they appear to just simply disappear, or they aren't there. And this is because the photos are actually taken in a studio with the crosshairs edited on afterwards. And you can clearly see they disappear. And as you will hear in a second, new photographs again came up after the time, proving that these were the originals which had fake crosshairs put on, which were then rectified later.
New photographs did come out to the public after the old photographs. That was only because the photographs that the public received first were from the media, low quality scans that the media took of the NASA originals, which were later revealed to the public. If you flick along, you can see the original NASA there. You can clearly see there is a crosshair that is visible. And you can also see the photos of much higher quality. There is no enhance button as many crime dramas on TV would show. So this is clearly an original photo, whereas the other was a bad copy. Meanwhile, we can see an effect known as washing out here. The crosshairs on the camera, the crosshairs on the camera are very, very thin and very black. So against a bright white background, such as this leg here, the crosshairs appear to just wash out. You can see the crosshairs are visible on the red stripes of the American flag, but not the white stripes.
Can I just say that your argument really doesn't wash here, purely because if they're ready to go afterwards, then you'd expect them to be complete, not missing.
Well, they edited them all badly because of the technology they had at the time.
If I was editing on a crosshair afterwards, I made sure I put on a crosshair.
Well, they basically
I would stop part way.
Moreover, if you're going to have a crosshair, why not use a camera with a crosshair at the time?
Well, the fact is, NASA gave these photos to the media, and the whole thing was designed as a media exercise to scare Russia and to prove that America had dominance in space. So they needed to get these photos out as quickly as possible, which is why the poor editing came about from a rushed job. And why would the media get poor quality images when NASA's main output is through the media, and they were the ones who provided the images in the first place? And that's why the rushed job done by NASA is the reason. Plus, I said, the low technology.
There's a book out called Full Moon. It's a huge coffee table sized book. I don't know if you've ever seen it. And it's got all the NASA photographs from the original moon landing. Well, all the moon landings, and the crosshairs are there throughout. And these are really high res.
Well, that will be the released afterwards, after the mistake has been pointed out. So the next argument is the sea rock that was seen on the moon. And this is basically a rock which had a sea on it. And for anyone who doesn't know what a letter C looks like, there's an example.
Copyright the moon.
As you can just see here, there's the sea inside the square on the rock. And this basically, when NASA was faking the moon landings at Disney, was the stage plot. Because all big films, such as I presume most of you have seen Harry Potter films, there's a scene where all the walls are collapsing and there's rocks everywhere. And every last rock had a number and was in the exact right place to keep continuity. Now, seeing as you're basically having the biggest hoax in the world, or outer space as well, I guess you could put it, you need to make sure that everything is perfect, scene to scene. Because if it's not, you're going to get caught out, as they have been here. And this is basically a letter C put on a rock that was supposed to be the other way up, which has later been seen by everyone looking at the footage.
Okay, I'll admit there is a NASA-released explanation for this that doesn't quite hold up. They suggested it may have been a speck of dust or a bit of grit on the lens, but as anyone who knows anything about photography will know, anything on the lens doesn't obscure part of the image, it will just, or doesn't completely obscure it, it will just create a fuzz effect, it will lower the quality of the image.
We should of course give credit to our photographic expert who pointed that out.
Yes, thank you. However, my explanation that I actually prefer is a psychological phenomenon that is called pareidolia. Basically, the human mind is conditioned to see familiar objects, such as faces is the most common example, on random patterns. Here we see the man in the moon, as it's known, and a crater on Mars where shadows placed in the exact positions looks a bit like the Virgin Mary, and then a particularly happy crater, which I'm a big fan of. I suggest that the rock on the moon does have a formation on it that looks like a C, but that is just a completely random thing. There must be, just by the laws of probability, something that looks like a C out of nature. It's a very simple shape when you think about it.
Now, that is a very good point. And it's a shame you weren't working at NASA at the time, because you could have given them a better explanation, rather than the released one, which didn't wash in the slightest. So I suggest to you the fact that they gave the wrong explanation when quite clearly it couldn't, as we've heard, have been a camera error, as they put it, means that it was a hoax and they just simply didn't know what to do to correct their mistake.
NASA are aeronautics experts, not photography experts. I'd just like you to bear that in mind.
Exactly, so they're going to make a mistake when they're coming up with excuses. So now, the footprints on the moon, which is one of the greatest photos released, and it shows where man has been taking one large step onto the moon, as it were. And you can see here in the incredibly fine lunar dust, you have a perfectly preserved footprint of men which are in huge boots, walking around and not necessarily taking exactly enough care where they're placing their feet, because they're taking big leaping steps onto the moon. Now, this is a very fine powder, and anyone who's been onto a beach will know that when you step onto a perfectly dry, as this would have been, because it would have boiled away otherwise, powder, it doesn't form a perfect footprint. It sags around your foot and leaves a dint, if you will, where your foot was. So it's just this was basically another media stunt to romanticise the moon landings, to say that these footprints will be immortalised on the moon.
It's a gravity effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it?
Oh, what, sorry?
The gravity is only 1/6 on Earth, so it wouldn't dissipate like it would on Earth. If you go down to, the gravity effect on Earth would be more prompt.
That is true, but it still wouldn't account for the exact rigidness of the lines, because when you remove your foot, now taking the reverse with gravity, the powder is going to be more affected by the force that you're giving to it by friction, to say the bottom of your sole, and it's going to be displaced that way, lifting it up and causing it to come back down, and that would distort the image. So it's a valid point, but the reverse would also cause, in my opinion, that not to happen.
Could I make a comment here? What you've got to remember is that the lunar regolith is very, very finely divided at its outer extremity and has been impacted with small particles for years. It's very, very small, finely divided powder, and that kind of powder retains its shape because there's no air, no wind, no displacement, physics. So what you're arguing isn't meeting the physics of the reality of the fineness of the dust and the environment on the moon, which is a vacuum.
Well, that's what the physicists would tell us.
There goes my
That's
first
what
point.
I am.
She explained it.
That was a very good explanation, yeah. The other thing you have to bear in mind is the way one walks on the moon in low gravity. You do have to take very carefully placed, deliberate steps. Hence why the footprint wasn't knocked over or blurred or smudged or whatever word you want to use.
Is it not also a point that they could have actually done a deliberate footprint just to photograph?
True. If you're trying to make an all-inspiring photo, you might want to place a very deliberate footprint.
You don't have to take one that you just have to walk.
Well, that is a very good point. The only thing I would say to that, and unfortunately I don't have all the facts on this, is that another image, which we'll touch on later, proves that the camera was on the chest of the astronaut. So if you're going to look perfectly down on the image that you've created specifically, it's going to be very hard to zoom in downwards unless you have a handheld camera, which they may have had, but I have seen no evidence for. So if someone else has created a footprint and you're going to go, oh look, a footprint, and take a photo of it, that is a lot more likely than...
There's no indication of how long that footprint had been there when they photographed it. It could be one of their footprints from the day before, or whatever. But I think that was a weak one, I have to say.
as opposed to the incredibly strong other ones. Now this one is a particularly strong one. As the module blasts off, and when it lands, there's firstly no crater as it comes in and it's slowing itself down with a massive flame. And you've just said, and it's been pointed out, that there's incredibly fine dust on the moon. And even landing in this, you see no evidence of a blast crater, no evidence of debris blown out of the way, and you don't see the feet of the rover sinking in at all. It appears to simply sit on this fine sill, which basically, I'm saying, would not happen. Now, to take the other end of this, when it blasts off again, as you can see in this photo, there's no flame from the bottom of the module. So, basically...
There's no dust either.
Yeah, exactly. It's because there is no atmosphere, but there's still a force downwards which is going to blow all the dust out of the way. Which is a very good point. So, this was actually staged at Disney with a little man and a fishing line hooking it back up to pull it out of the way. It's the only possible explanation.
Well,
So,
as for the invisible flame, the actual lander used a fuel called hydrazine, which burns with a flame that isn't in the visible spectrum, so there wouldn't have been an obvious flame coming from the bottom. As for the fact that the reason there's no dust kicked up, there have been a few ideas, probably the strongest of them being that the surface the capsule landed on was harder than the surface they later took the footprints on, although I will admit, that is one point you got me stumped on.
yeah. And I will concede the fact that the fuel was actually, I think it was dimethyl tetroxide mixed with hydrazine, which is so powerful that it burns too bright.
It's very energetic.
It's the wrong part of the spectrum to be seen. But there is no blast crater and there is no dust, which suggests again that it is staged. And the information about the fuel came out after the time again, which seems to be, if we think back, a recurring theme with NASA here, where somebody seems to point out these errors, and they go, oh no, we use this flame, which you just can't see. Yeah, it's fine.
Surely because NASA didn't expect so many people
To know it's a fishing. So, closing statements.
Yes. One thing you must keep in mind is that what Eddie is telling us here is that America hosts the world. They convinced everyone on Earth, apart from himself, that the moon landings were not
Very respected group of the internet.
except yourself.
Who do not wear tinfoil hats.
That's another argument.
Otherwise.
They needed more than tinfoil to protect themselves from the radiation.
Exactly. And that is something that we'll come on to in a second.
Except yourself, who... America cannot keep a secret, in short. Look at the history. If America cannot keep political espionage and an affair by the president a secret, how do we expect them to keep faking the lunar landings a secret, the greatest achievement that mankind has ever done? How? It's impossible, is how.
Just before I move on, I'd just like to point out here that each of these things, people had a very large motive to expose. So these are political figures who have basically half the country wanting them out of power. So any flaw, any issue, any conspiracy is going to be dug into as deep as possible by the opposition, often offering, we could say, payouts to anyone who manages it with fame and glory. So this is going to have a huge, huge motive to be uncovered. Whereas the moon landings, you've got to remember, this is one of the greatest feats America has never achieved. And basically, No politician is going to come into power and then suddenly go, oh no, I've seen the documents, we faked it all. They're going to be voted out within weeks. There'll be people in the street. And it's not going to happen. There's a lot of reasons to keep it a conspiracy. This was how they defeated the Russians in the space race. This was America's crowning glory. Who's going to want to undo that?
But as Forrest Gump proved to us, it only takes one man noticing some flashlights in Watergate.
Good old Forrest Gump.
Seeing as we're on stereotyping Americans, I'm not going to miss
Not that
out.
we do that.
The lunar landings have to be fake because Americans lie. Now, my good friend here, George Bush, tell me, did you ever find those weapons of mass destruction on Windows? And, well, no, he didn't. And Americans faked the whole thing, and we heard this earlier with the Russians. The Russians did have the first man in space, the first woman in space, the first animal in space, hard, soft landings, probes, etc., etc. That's the point. The Russians had it. Now, not once did the Russians try and put a man on the moon. They had all the technology, and they were in the lead, and they had a massive advantage. They had huge resources, and, well, very poor health and safety, to put it one way. And they've never ever put anyone on the moon, they've never tried to, they've never claimed to, they've never attempted it. Because it just wasn't possible at the time. And it now isn't possible for other reasons, as I mentioned, health and safety. And they have never even questioned the fact that the lunar landings were fake. My apologies, I just gave you a argument there. This was one point in my mind
You know it too well.
webmaster last week, and that was my final closing argument to you. But back on track, away from that huge lie I just told. I'm not really sure where to go from here. Oh yeah, I do actually have one ironclad reason that the lunar landings have to be real. And that is because the moon is made of cheese. As proved by Wallace in the great film itself. But I think we can all accept that they basically weren't fake, as Euan will now explain.
Well, people say obviously the Russians achieved most of the great feats in space engineering, but actually the Americans also did exactly the same things, sometimes months, but often weeks before, before would be different. America also completed the first space rendezvous where two craft would meet up and exchange people, which was of great importance towards the lunar landings. Russia were trying to put a man on the moon, they just didn't get there in time.
Well, what you basically forgot to say, Euan, the one conclusive argument in my opinion,
Okay, go on.
is that they have never ever claimed them to be fake.
Well, you said that.
I didn't get a chance to go into that. After I told you about the hydrazine, which I had him stumped for weeks on why it was an invisible flame.
That's a fair point.
But no, there was the whole point, which has now been made several times, that the Russians never ever claimed it to be fake.
And they had every motive to.
Now, we're going to open up to any questions, and then in a minute we'll go through some of these very, very loose theories that we decided had so little evidence it wasn't even worth touching upon, and a few of the reasons why America definitely did go to the moon. Because as much as I would love to prove Euan wrong, it's simply not going to happen. Any questions?
You're giving in a bit too quick there.
I have.
There is some evidence shown on the web and such like that on two different lunar landings they have pictures with identical backgrounds. The mountain backgrounds appear to be identical. I said it because to my own trained eye they do look identical. Now, we'll have to take the word that they are from two different lunar landings. I mean, I can't recognise the astronauts when they're in their spacesuits, one from another, they all look the same. I'm told they're two different landings, so one has to assume that they are, otherwise NASA would debunk it. I mean, how would that occur?
And the backgrounds on the moon are very monotone, very simple ups and downs. There's not really much variation on the horizon.
The argument for the landing has to hold because it was on television.
As we know, everything on television is complete fact.
I think it'd be giving the Americans too much credibility for ingenuity if it was a fake. Too much.
They're not that clever.
No.
No, but Walt Disney does have quite a lot of experience.
Yeah, now he does, not then.
So, what would it take to convince you that they were in fact a hoax?
It would probably take Buzz Aldrin to come out and say, "I never went to the moon," to convince me.
Take his pension off it.
What would it take to convince you that they actually did happen then?
Fibre? Well, there is no way that I would ever believe that the moon landings were real, because basically it was the Americans. I suppose if the Russians were to go now and plant an even bigger flag, I might believe that.
Have you ever heard of the
It's
Lunar
not
Reconnaissance Orbiter, launched in 2009?
Is that the European Space Agency probe which crash landed into the moon?
No, it's one
No.
that goes round them. They've actually photographed the moon quite recently,
Have they?
and they can actually see the lunar landing sites and the debris, the footpaths, and everything else.
Now, who sent this probe up, may I ask? Well, was it the European Space Agency? Was it Russia? Was it?
Actually, see the Apollo.
There is a Japanese one that's
But were these NASA photos again?
There is a Japanese one that's been doing the same.
Japanese. Very friends of the Americans, as we all know.
You can actually see the footsteps.
There have been, there have been quite a few orbiters.
Tracks there.
Yeah.
There was another one which was the European Space Agency which crashed into the moon purposefully, and that one also had a few good photos which unfortunately we weren't allowed to put on here.
Another question here.
Yes?
Yeah.
Two questions. 2 points. One is about comments from US astronauts on Earth. Some of the people in NASA have made significant comments about the unworthiness of the spacecraft and have criticised the practicability of getting to the moon. And I said, it's just I can't no way I would have been involved in that. And some of those people have met accidents after the event. Another point is that, and so one of the ladies sort of touched on it was behind me earlier on, and that was that at the time of the Apollo, you had a very heavy solar activity with a lot of particles being released, and you would have expected much more protection to be necessary than was afforded by the actual space vehicles that went up to the moon.
Yes, well, I'd like to touch on the first point that you raised. That is, in certain circles, and some of these people I spoke to on the internet, one of the strongest and largest arguments. And they claim that 10 people got on the wrong side of NASA and America. But I sort of, despite it being an incredibly strong point, I really didn't want to bring into question the horrific deaths of these people, which I don't want to propagate any rumours which don't actually have that much evidence to them. Because 3 men died in a fire at NASA.
In a capsule.
Which was in a capsule. Another 3...
Others have died on...
Yeah, 3 died in a training launch. But horrible accidents do happen. And unless there is stone cold evidence to the contrary, I thought it was best to leave it out of the PowerPoint and not touch upon, for some people, a very emotional, important subject and speculate when we have no proof, and it's simply people saying these horrible things that happened was all, and it could be, but I'm not going to say either way. Well, no, I am going to say either way. It was an accident, in my opinion.
One of the things people say is that, you know, the Apollo 11 and all the entire Apollo missions, or in fact all space travel is incredibly dangerous. You're essentially sitting people on a giant stack of fuel, lighting the fuel, hoping they fly. Yeah.
What about the issue of
The fan elements
release?
Well, there's a lot of contrasting evidence in this respect. There is a lot of radiation coming out, and it's no one's going to deny that. But NASA say, and they say, and Euan will agree, that there was enough protection, and I will say that there wasn't. And quite clearly, without having massive facilities to test that, we can't really say either way. Obviously, because it was all in a studio somewhere, it doesn't matter. It was never an issue, as you pointed out here. So I don't know I'm actually helping you. So question at the back.
Well, I was just going to say, I was just answering the point there. Sorry, I didn't see whether it was answered earlier. I was just outside something up. But apparently, a large proportion of the Apollo astronauts went on to develop cataracts at a surprisingly young age, which is often cited as one of the reasons that, well, they probably did go through quite a lot of radiation in that 4 or 5 day period. You know, so
it's a well experienced phenomenon in space. Astronauts will occasionally detect just see a massive flash of light, and that's where some radiation has just hit their optical nerve. It doesn't happen on Earth because the atmosphere blocks solar radiation, but it's what happens.
Yeah,
to
one of
astronauts.
the proofs that they did definitely go is, you know, they've obviously been exposed to more radiation.
Well, I would counter that from the point that it was a fake, that they didn't actually go to the moon, and that maybe they just went into orbit. And other than the radiation, I've heard of links between the low amount of gravity and was obviously the muscle wastage and all these sort of problems, but to the eyes and quite a lot of loss of eyesight, which they now have sophisticated methods to counteract that, say on the International Space Station. But they didn't at the time, and if these guys just went up into space and hung around for a while, then it could just have been due to the gravity and causing quite a lot of problems with their eyes, which didn't manifest at the time and came on later because they were only there for a while.
They still get radiation in low Earth orbit as well. So.
That's true, but there was never any problems for the Russian people. In that respect, didn't die instantly.
Could I just make the comment that of the 12 that went to the moon, 2 are dead?
Yeah, they did happen between in the 60s and 70s.
But if we're asking,
I think that falls under the same point here.
is there a higher risk? The important point is that 1 in 6 are already dead. I hope to live quite a long time.
From a statistical standpoint, though, if you put a 5% significance level in there, it's never going to pass of a sample group of 12. So it's perfectly reasonable to say that maybe they just died naturally and it's a freak. But if all 12 had died, then
Armstrong
it might be.
Exactly.
So it's
These were people who did it in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were veteran aeronauts at the time. So they're going to die.
I think the point that 12 and then 2 have died is just significant. It's statistically insignificant, basically. You've been waiting for it.
I'd like to congratulate the propagandists for the hoax. I'm sure you've gone round the country giving this talk to many people. But I just wondered when you thought it might be slightly audacious to give it within sight of the telescope and track the lander. Have you any comments?
This is the telescope that claims to attract the landers. Well, no, because you can't be audacious about the truth. One must speak up in society, you've got to get your point across. I think of myself as a modern day Edward Snowden. maybe like that.
Modern.
A bit more modern.
I know we're young, but that's even.
That is pushing it a bit.
How would you argue against the experiment that they did on the moon with the hammer and the feather?
Of course.
Well,
Because that's a damn difficult one to fail.
I would say it wouldn't be. As equally as you, but either they did it in a vacuum chamber on Earth.
Have you any idea how difficult it would be to build a vacuum chamber
That
that
big.
size?
Admittedly, it is quite hard. But
In 1969,
I'd say
no, I'm not saying that
energy-
people was in it. I'm saying it was filmed, and then they basically. Okay, I'm maybe pushing their technology a bit far. But my second point on this issue is. You see the feather, it still seems to, parts of the feather go down quicker and other parts don't. To my eye, it seems to flap up at the side slightly. And my point on that would be, if you could hold something in the air and pull it up, as you can see with the module for the lunar module, you can pull it down. So you can pull it down at the same speed as the hammer, and then slow the footage down, because there's no movement anywhere else except the hammer and the feather, to make it seem that they flow at exactly the same rates. So that would be my point. With what technology they had, it was NASA. There were still some very smart people, maybe not smart enough to get to the moon, but very smart people nonetheless.
There's one thing about the whole show, if you have a show which is putting men on the moon, then people will gild the lily in a number of different ways. If you look at the film The Dish, there is a perfect example of that, where if the men went to the moon and they came back, there's still the footage, the conversation between the guy talking to the janitor at the bottom of the telescope there. And that's something that is natural for people to do, to make those extra bits of stuff which may be made up to make that show even more impressive. And some of those things where you say, I've got a picture which, you know, if you've got a camera which is taking a picture of that module coming up into the sky, and your camera doesn't work, are you going to make that up? You might do. It doesn't mean the whole end-to-end process isn't real.
Well, what I would say to that is that for the purposes of secrecy, you're going to want to make it as real as you can. So you can send the rocket up, you can have people in the rocket, you bring the rocket back down. And you can keep it closely confined, this conspiracy, and I'd say you can, they did. And if you have that core that's faking it, you then have all the people who believe that, who then think they're doing things, say the janitor who is there and believes the rocket is going up to the moon. Human nature and the brain will respond telling you that these things are real, and the memories and pictures will be created by people who think that they're sending a rocket to the moon, but aren't quite, if that makes sense. So you're still going to have people bringing up all these fantastic memories and arguments and things that happened, and all the little bits on the side that make it seem so plausible. But they didn't know any better, would be my response.
Couple of points. Firstly, as part of your denial, are you also denying that it's Apollo 10 actually is a preliminary went around the moon and came back?
I am for definite saying that they never landed on the moon. There are situations in which it could have gone around the moon. It may not have been manned, would be one. It may have been manned, and they might not just have been able to go the whole way. What I am for definite saying is that it does not add up. and they cannot have done all the stuff on the lunar surface. As a preface, I would probably say it is unlikely that they did that, as that is the conspiracy view of it. It is very unlikely that men went around the moon. Definitely did not go to the moon. That was all Disney and pictures and all that sort of stuff.
So that's exactly 3 points then. How do you explain Apollo 13?
Why?
That's the question I've got to ask.
And not Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks. And everybody seems to
Yeah.
Movie.
It's a very good film.
I do not have that much information on Apollo 13, and unfortunately, although I might get some booze, I have not seen the film either. Did they get down safely from Apollo 13?
Yes.
Yes. Well, my response to that then would be, nothing ever went wrong.
But you had the whole world's really
Yeah.
and
Said by NASA.
and
This could all be staged. This could be, they can't get to the moon.
radio messages coming through.
Well, they sent a probe up, but it never went to the moon. They just sent signals back from space. So what I would suggest, and I've thought of this now, there will be much smarter people than me on the internet who have already found the truth of this situation. But what I would say to that would be, we were never inside that rocket, we were never there. We simply heard stuff going back from the rocket to NASA. So either NASA could have faked it, or the rocket could have sent back fakes which NASA then sent on. They all got back safely, and there's many, many ways in which they could have faked it, because they never actually got to the moon, I believe, on that one.
Last point. Is the film Capricorn 1 basis of all your evidence?
Have you seen that one?
My father brought this one up last week, and I finished my answer to him with the preface, "Thank you from the crazy person at the back," which didn't go down too well. But as he raised, the film does bring that up, and that touches on what we mentioned before about the people being killed and knocked off. Personally, I'm avoiding all aspects of that because I really would hate to touch on things which are too important to speculate about. So no, it's not this. But I have heard of the film and it has been mentioned. There's quite a few I have seen, but I don't really think Wallace and Gromit is going to help me out.
Why would America want to go to the moon and play golf? Don't you think it would have done something a bit more useful?
The official record is that the golf clubs and ball were smuggled on board, that NASA had no knowledge of it, and that someone just wanted to go out to play golf on the moon, which it was to be fair.
I would suggest again that this would be another snub of Russia. It was basically America wanted to show the gravity thing off again with some very, very complicated and well done cinema techniques, I would suggest, where they'd make them ball move in slow motion. Because I believe there's images of that. Because I've heard all about this, and it was NASA stories that were smuggled on. But they've got this whole cinema set up there, which they used to fake all of it. And so while they're at it, they're going to go in. How can we wind up Russia a bit more? I know, we'll play golf on the moon. They can't even get there. And we're having a nice little round, teeing off, landing a crater, that sort of thing. So they're basically having another go at Russia, as we mentioned, through their cinematography.
It is a very interesting point to make that progressively throughout the Apollo missions, did get sillier and sillier. Apollo 11 gave us the first man to walk on the moon, Apollo 12 gave us the first man to dance on the moon. So, it is quite fun.
I think they'll do next to make it even more fun.
I don't think they'll go again. I think that computer, well basically, either way, it's not going to happen again. Because there's so much expertise in filmmaking and computers and all this stuff that they would be found out if they tried to fake it again. And they can't claim that their footage is poor quality because of the time and all this sort of stuff. And there'll be so much more pressure on them to prove it, and so much easier for them to get caught out. And then you want to make the point about money and safety.
Yeah, because back then obviously they didn't have as rigorous safety precautions, they didn't have those options available to them. So they were able to send people up just because that was the most safe they could make it. These days we would be able to make it incredibly safe so that the chance that anything goes wrong would be ridiculously small, and obviously that will be the only way they can do it because they can't justify putting people at risk. However, those options would be ludicrously expensive. So they couldn't, well, unless they do unmanned mission, which they're very likely to do if they ever want to reach Mars. Obviously one of the ideas of that is to reach the moon first, put a base there and use that to reach Mars. But just health and safety really, they won't be able to do it again.
But you don't think the plans of NASA and the European space have got to actually put people back on the moon as a preparatory practice to actually go to Mars?
And as sort of like a way to almost a gas station.
Yeah, well not just that, yeah, but they're supposed to be practicing. They actually want to put men back on the moon again just to practice actually how they go about tackling Mars.
Just having a word with Richard. Is there anything to see outside?
I'm just going to check it, it's clear still.
Yeah,
Two
still clear. Occultation as well. We have. Yeah. Could we have a round of applause?